Folks, we got a big review this time. Lots of cards, a new legendary, tons of new Labrum cards, the new Paladin archetype that's coming, and I think is going to be pretty crazy. Lots to talk about. Let's jump into it.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right. Handful of new cards here today, including Yisiel Windsinger, a new 9-mana 5/5 for Druid, and it reads your spells cost 1. So this is basically an Aviana, but for spells instead of minions. And although Aviana in standard format was never a particularly insane card, there were certainly a few moments in wild format where Aviana reducing minions to 1 was particularly problematic, and in fact, she had to get nerfed. It turns out summoning all kinds of stuff with Aviana Kun is a really big problem. Now, Yisiel Windsinger, I don't see any immediate, game-breaking scenarios with this one where discounting spells creates some kind of absurd win condition or just really oppressive feeling moments. I've even been reading some, Reddit threads and such, and nobody really knows exactly how this card's going to be problematic, but a lot of people have this same sentiment that one day it could be. Like, what possibilities is this going to open up in the future? And that makes a lot of people nervous because, of course, discounting something like this or Malagos in combination with this means you could chain together a lot of different spells, do tons of burst damage, etc. So this is one of those cards where it's like, I don't really know exactly how this works, but I know cost discounts in Hearthstone historically have been very, very powerful effects. And I know that, OTK combos can be pretty silly when you reduce cost effects of things as well, particularly spells in a class that does have a handful of higher damage spells and card draw spells and all kinds of things that go in that combo environment rather nicely. So I don't really see the path yet for Miss Windsinger here, but I do believe that there will be one someday. This card just does those things that, Hearthstone can do really well with cost discounts. Now, I will say, it's fairly high cost, but so is Aviana, coming in at 9 mana. The stats here aren't particularly strong for a 9-drop, but this isn't the kind of card where you're looking at those metrics. You're caring specifically about how powerful this effect can be and how you might be able to abuse these discounts in a really significant way. So I don't think you should worry so much about the stats on this minion. We probably don't really ever care about that. Now, one other important note with a card like this is that this does limit the utility of things like Innervate and the Coin, which can sometimes be really powerful combo enablers for Druid, allowing you to get kind of over the hump when it comes to mana. Because Innervate just gives you 1 mana now, and it's going to cost 1 mana with Yisiel. It's not going to be a net gain, it's going to be net neutral. Now, Nourish could still be a 1 mana spell that gives you some mana to play with after using Yisiel. So there are still ways to kick off some kind of engine, and we might even see more in the future as well. With things like Floop's Glorious Gloop going away, they're losing another one in standard format that could kick off the mana to make something like this scary. So, again, I don't know what path forward this card has. I just know that it has those characteristics that we've seen be good in the past, and I think it has characteristics that will probably be good in the future. It might take a few expansions from now for this one to ever get there, so don't be shocked if this comes out the gate limping a little bit, but eventually somehow finds its legs and wins the race. So next up here, let's take a look at Labrum of Hope, and this is basically the introduction of an all-new archetype for Paladin that synergizes with Lady Liadrin we saw previously, and I kind of teased, well, wait a minute, keep an eye on this one. And I'm going to pop up some cards right now on screen to help you get a sense of what all these are about. We're going to review each of these in this video. But basically, it's a Labrum package of spells called Labrums, which are often buffs, but also can do other things or just targeted spells as well, like Labrum of Hope here. And they're going to be able to get some discounts. And of course, Lady Liadrin can essentially add them back into your hand to create this just insane value chain package that is producing these really heavily discounted spells that can hopefully do a lot for you. So Labrum of Hope at 9 mana restores 8 health, so a pretty big heal here. Also summons an 8/8 taunt with Divine Shield as well. So a big board builder defensively that also heals you. So a great stabilization card. Now at 9 mana, that doesn't make me particularly excited. I'm like, well, okay, it's maybe kind of Tyrion adjacent, but it doesn't give me the weapon and stuff. So I'm not in love with this at 9 mana, although I do think it's fine for the record. It kind of compares to things like Obsidian Statue almost in a way, where it's this really big sticky taunt that has some life gain in it. So not terrible, but of course, if you discount this by 3, 5 mana, throughout the course of a game because you've drawn some of your Labrum discount cards. A 4-mana 8/8 with Taunt and Divine Shield that is getting added back to my hand with Lady Liadrin? Okay, you have my attention. Suddenly, this starts to make a lot of sense to me. So this is one of those cards that's not great necessarily to base level, but considering the context and synergies that will hopefully exist within this archetype, Labrum of Hope seems like it's a card that's going to fit in really quite nicely. Now, of course, the condition with these cards that always exists is like, yes, if it works, it makes a ton of sense, but is it going to work? Well, it's hard to review cards like that because the power level is up here. The likelihood for it to work may be a little bit lower. That said, I think this one actually is fairly likely to work. I think this feels like a really cool, big investment in a new mechanic. And I'm sure Blizzard tuned this in a way to make it relevant. Otherwise, Paladin may not have much to do or much to work with. So hopefully they got the numbers right on this. So I'm investing my faith in this one. I think Labrum of Hope is really good. And I think the Labrum package is going to be solid too. So next up here, we have the Labrum of Wisdom, a 2-mana Labrum, give a minion +1/+1, and Death Rattle, add a Labrum of Wisdom spell to your hand. So this is obviously going to be 0 mana, like super fast most games, which makes it this really cheap, easy buff cycle that you just can spam on minions over and over again. With things like Divine Shields, obviously that minion buff can go really nicely, any kind of high pressure minions. It's just going to go nuts. And it's going to keep coming back. You just get to keep doing it for free over and over again. And then Lady Liadrin, of course, can give you all of those back. You could have a hand of like 9 free Labrum of Wisdoms that you just hit the hero power button and you buff your minion into an 8/8 over and over and over again for free every turn. Anything else you draw, you kind of toss in as well to create this just ridiculous chain of Labrum of Wisdoms on your hero power every turn. That could be your end game winning scenario, right? Where you just keep chaining things over and over again. Now, obviously susceptible to things like silence and such. I don't know if that actual scenario will happen often, but nonetheless, just a great kind of feedback value loop here with Labrum of Wisdom, where you just keep getting more and more value in hand. There are some risks, actually. You may not want to play too many of these for your Lady Liadrin, lest you risk like excluding other Labrums you might want instead that are a little bit higher value, that pack more punch. Because this is going to be so cheap so fast, you just cycle it into like every turn. Every time you play some kind of Labrum synergy discount card, just slam a Labrum of Wisdom on there a couple times, give it a buff. It helps you keep up so that you can play into that late game value scenario really, really well. So nifty little high flexible core Labrum piece, another solid card. So next up here, we have the Labrum of Justice, a 6-mana spell, but again, not really 6 mana. It's going to be discounted down to like 3 or 2 pretty often, and it will equip a 1/4 weapon and change the health of all enemy minions to 1. So we've got an equality style effect here that also gives you a nice weapon to potentially clear those minions. Now, that's not something you're going to want to do forever over the course of a game, because eventually you'll die to all those weapon attacks. But nonetheless, in a pinch, this gives you the removal to help swing boards back in your favor and start generating some of that late game Labrum value successfully. Of course, with things like Consecration in your deck as well, this gives you some great wide board removal options that synergize with your deck as opposed to being forced to run something like Equality. And yeah, you can still go face this weapon every once in a while too to get some chip damage. So I do think this is in some ways one of the weaker Labrums because I don't think it has the late game like scalability, repetitiveness that the other ones do. This has a little bit more of a calculatedness in that you have to react and use it kind of carefully. But nonetheless, it still feels like a pretty solid option for a Labrum Paladin. So now let's take a look at the Door Attendant Labrum synergy card here. 2 mana, 2/3 Battlecry. Reduce the cost of your Labrums by 1 this game. So just to specify again that this game, that's a persistent effect that applies to all Labrums, not ones that are already in hand or deck. Just any Labrum you've generated that you've got in your deck already. Anything that shows up magically, Door Attendant's going to reduce that cost permanently by 1. So that's going to stack up and chain over the course of a game so that your Labrums become really, really cheap. Eventually, once you've played, multiples of these or other Labrum discount card options. But we've got here just a really flexible little minion that you're investing a ton of tempo reduction in the past. Like, this might save you something like, 6+ mana over the course of a game. Even, maybe 9. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but this one minion can scale really hard for major discounts later, and it's really flexible and easy to play as a 2 mana 2/3. You're totally fine to play this on curve in a deck that's probably going to hit its power spike later in the game. It's a little speed bump, trades in early. If you have to play it on like turn 8 just to fit it into a turn, slam the minion down. It's fine for 2 mana. You're not making a big overcommitment for your Door Attendant. So it's a very flexible thing, early or late, whenever you need to invest, it's there. And if you have the right set of Labrums in hand, this can pay back immediately where it's basically free with a 2 mana Labrum, for instance, right? If you play this, that's 2 mana on Labrums right away. You might be able to play both of those now on your Door Attendant itself. To make it, first off, a more significant threat on board, perhaps, but also just make it free, essentially, because you need some minions sometimes to buff in these kinds of decks as well. So all in all, perfect little Labrum synergy card. It's obviously going to be a staple for that archetype, and I think, again, that archetype's going to work, so really strong option here. So next up here, we have the Aldor Truthseeker, of course, another Labrum synergy card, 5 mana, 4/6, Taunt, and Battlecry. Reduce the cost of your Labrums by 2 this game. So another really big discount application here across a ton of cards over the course of a game. And I think this is the card to me that signals that Blizzard really wants to make this work, because they gave this guy Taunt. It would have been so easy to not give this Taunt and make this kind of a difficult card to play where there was this kind of risk reward. It's like, man, I got to get this down, but I'm really nervous. But when you give it Taunt, this feels great to play. A 5 mana 4/6 Taunt is absolutely fine. As we've seen with like Shield of Galakron, playing that body, just getting it down is great. Investing into your future Galakron. Aldor Truthseeker does the same thing, but invests into your future Labrums. And again, that immediate payback can exist as well because of this gigantic discount. So another card that feels really good to play and synergizes perfectly with the archetype. A good defensive body to build on. Aldor Truthseeker is basically perfect for this synergy. And again, I think this card's going to be really, really strong. And then finally here, forgive the artwork on this one, I had to screen grab this. This is Hand of Adal, a 2 mana spell that gives a minion +2/+2 and draws a card for Paladin. Now this is not a Labrum, but it still could synergize really nicely in a kind of buff style deck or a Lady Liadrin style deck, because you got here a really flexible early game buff that also just cycles into a new card, which is fantastic, right? This is a really cool way to get things running early in the game. Just make sure you're keeping up on board while cycling into the things you care about, like your Labrums or your Labrum discount style cards. Also could be used outside of that deck as well as just a really flexible card draw option, buffing something you care about, like a Taunt, or even in an aggressive deck, this could work nicely. Just play a 1-drop, buff it on 2, keep the deck running, and just go face as well. So this looks like a really flexible little spell buff that could go a couple different directions. Feels like a strong card. So next up here is a Druid spell. Hey, we need some cheap spells. Germination could be one of them. It's a 4 mana spell for Druid, and it summons a copy of a friendly minion and then gives that copy Taunt. So we already saw a demon copying card for Demon Hunters. Now we're seeing a general copy card for Druids that also gives that minion Taunt. And of course, if you're running really big, awesome stuff in your deck that costs more than 4 mana and you're able to make a copy of it for 4 mana, that has Taunt, that's a really big deal, right? In particular, if it has some other positive effect, Death Rattles or Rush or something, you're really able to put a card like this into impact immediately, which is nice. Now, clearly, with a card like this, you're probably going to want that minion to be 6 mana or less if you're going to combo them out in a single turn, which does limit the scope of a card like this somewhat, because you might only gain kind of that 2 mana, right? If you get a 6 mana minion for 4, that's good. If you get a 2 mana minion for 4, probably not all that excited, but nonetheless, there are still always those really, really cool high-value minions you might want an extra copy of for some reason or another, whether that's just cheating out like a big Twilight Drake or something in the early game. I need another big Twilight Drake, boom, Germination makes that possible, and a Twilight Drake with Taunt, of course, is really, really cool. So unlike the Demon copy card we saw previously, I think this one has a little bit more utility because that Taunt makes the stats impactful immediately. Beyond that, it's in Druid, which has more kind of mana manipulation and more things that I think you might want to copy of relevance. Now, this card does, of course, have some weaknesses, much like the Demon Hunter copy card. If your minion is damaged, well, in that case, you're going to get a damaged copy, which reduces the value. And although some people might say, oh, it's just like a better Faceless Manipulator, remember, you can't copy enemy minions with this card. It's only friendly minions, unlike Faceless Manipulator, so you can't like take your opponent's Tyrion, for instance. So again, that could limit some of the flexibility here of Germination. Despite that, I think this card has some interesting utility. It could pop into a deck here and there and make sense. I don't think it's going to be a great card, but it certainly looks playable. Next up here is the Shattered Rumbler for Shaman, a 5 mana 4/6 elemental with a Battle Cry, if you cast a spell last turn, deal 2 damage to all minions. So we have here another kind of spell trigger card, creating this spell chain for Shaman. And again, like I'll say with the one we said many reviews ago, I don't think that's a necessarily difficult trigger to activate. Like, obviously, spells happen a lot in Hearthstone, but there is a sort of natural counter synergy here where if you're running this deck that runs all these minions that demand you play spells, then you're going to have more minions in your deck. Like, I played my Shattered Rumbler last turn, now I have to set up another turn to play the next Shattered Rumbler or the next kind of spell trigger card, whatever it may be. So you almost inherently break your chain. Plus, Shaman is a class that has relied on minions a lot lately, especially when minions like this with Battle Cries encourage you to do something like play the Shaman quest to double your Battle Cries. Well, you're going to want to have more minions in your deck to utilize the quest. So I am seeing some problems here where it's like, man, all these great Battle Cries that are probably best if doubled. Like, I think for Shattered Rumbler here, for instance, 2 damage post turn 5 gets a lot less compelling, whereas 4 damage starts to still feel pretty good for Shattered Rumbler, right? Like, it's suddenly a Flame Strike in the late game instead of just a Consecration. So you might want to double this with your Battle Cry. But then you've got those problems where you're running Battle Cry minions all the time and not many spells, and this doesn't go off all that much. And certainly, if this doesn't go off, then I think you've got here a very weak minion, not a good one at all. So you have to have that spell last turn trigger active to make Shattered Rumbler good. So all in all, I'm feeling like there's going to be some awkwardness problems here. Like, yes, of course, you look at this card in a vacuum. It's got a great body with a cool effect attached to it. It's got Battle Cry synergies, potentially even elemental synergies. All of that looks great at a surface level, but as I start to consider context, archetype, deck construction, I do see some really big problems for this card to fit in and slot in. And I don't know if this spell last turn stuff is going to work well in Shaman, because I don't know that Shaman can find the right mix of cards to set those triggers up naturally and make the deck feel consistent and coherent with other really powerful things they want to do. So all in all, I'd say a fine card, just one that I don't think is going to ever take over or be like a star or even the archetype for Shaman. Next up here, we have the Natal Lion, a new 4-mana minion for Hunter. It's a 5/2 beast with Rush and Battle Cry. Choose a friendly minion, gain a copy of its Death Rattle. So we have here a nice little Death Rattle copy card, which we've seen Hunter have a few of in the past that worked out rather nicely in some old Death Rattle Hunter builds. But this one I think even more intriguing in a way, because it's got Rush, and it takes really good mid-game trades as a 5/2 minion. That's fantastic. So in the past, some of those Death Rattle builds could be susceptible to just kind of sitting there passively doing their Death Rattle thing and not really interacting with their opponent's board much. But Natal Lion gives you the upside of the Death Rattle and still allows you to interact really quickly with a minion that's going to trade especially well around turn 5. We've seen things like Militia Commander get played in the past for Warrior. That 5-mana Rush at 4 mana seems like a great breakpoint in Hearthstone, and I think it'll be great for Natal Lion. Plus, this having low health could seem bad at first, but I think actually if you're trying to gain Death Rattle synergies, then it's great, because you might activate that Death Rattle immediately upon trading and get some real value out of this. So, whereas Militia Commander left behind like a 2/2 most of the time, maybe a 2/3, 2/1, this could leave behind something insane because of its Death Rattle, or activate some other kind of active Death Rattle effect that's impacting the board in a really strong way. So to me, this card does a lot of stuff very well for what Hunter's looking to do. Now, of course, it does demand some Death Rattle synergy to work. You have to have some other minion to either play simultaneously with it, or put down on a previous turn, like your turn 3, and have it stick. But if there are egg-style decks that show up, that's perfect for a card like this. But even, just slotting in like a 1-mana Shimmerfly or something with your Natal Lion could go a really long way. Just get that good trade and then add that extra spell to hand, and you're absolutely fine for a 5-mana turn. So all in all, Natal Lion to me seems like a really flexible, powerful, synergistic card that could be very, very good. So next up here, we have the Grand Slam, a new 10-mana spell for Hunter that will summon you 4 3/5 Cleft Hoofs that attack random enemies. So in total there, 4 pretty solid minions. That's 12/20 in stats in total if you'd like to add that up. And importantly, they attack random enemies, not just random enemy minions, which means these can go face. If you played this on an empty board, it would be 12 damage to your opponent's face. And that's the one saving grace for this card. Because when we look at this at a base level, 10 mana for Hunter is a lot. Hunter usually likes to end the game sooner than that. Even with Highlander Hunters, they're usually pushing much, much faster than 10 mana. Like, yes, of course, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza is a 9 mana play, but that often results in the end of the game if they haven't already gotten there with things like Dino Tamer Bran. But I do think this makes a pretty natural follow-up to something like a Dragon Queen Alexstrasza turn, where your opponent's on the back foot, you've played a bunch of minions, they've probably focused more on removing your stuff than developing minions of their own, which means this could just be 12 damage to the face that ends the game. And, that kind of makes it like a Pyroblast, but also if it doesn't end the game, you still get a really big board out of it as well. And then, of course, is the alternative where they do have a board of small to medium-sized minions, and you potentially clear the board and develop some remaining threats yourself. So a couple different angles of utility for this card. Burst damage, board building, and even removal spell as well. So really the only challenge for this one is the fact that it's 10 mana. But despite that, I think we've seen, outside of, aggro Dragon Hunter, but certainly with Highlander Hunter, which seems like it will remain a viable archetype to me, particularly as more good cards come out, then a card like Nagrand Slam, I think it could make the cut. Since you're only running one of it in a Highlander anyway, this is probably not a card you want to run two of, just because your deck would get a little bit too heavy on the top end. But maybe one of these fits its way into a Highlander deck, has that big kind of finisher piece. Beyond that, I don't know if Nagrand Slam is going to make as much sense. It seems like some of the other Hunter archetypes have been built around having minions in hand, not necessarily spells. But then again, toss this into a wild spell hunter, you got some cool plays as well. That's beyond the scope of this review, but nonetheless, a really interesting card that I think is good enough to shift Hunter a little bit more in this direction where this card does fit and it does make sense. So is this going to work in every Hunter deck? Absolutely not. Like, this is not good for something like a Dragon Hunter that wants to end the game, turn 6, turn 7. This will never get played. It won't make sense. But there are still some builds of Hunter that do work for Nagrand Slam as far as I'm concerned, which makes this a viable card. Next up here, we have the Septic Veil Weaver for Priest, a 2-mana 2/3 that reads, after you cast a spell on a minion, add a Priest spell to your hand. Familiar to Lyra the Sunshard, card of old, that would generate you priest spells anytime you cast a spell. Now, this has one important distinction. You have to cast that spell on a minion for the Septic Veil Weaver to chain that new spell into your hand, which does, of course, limit quite a few things. Like, say a Thoughtsteal all of a sudden doesn't continue the chain because Thoughtsteal didn't cast on a minion. Now, importantly, this can be on enemy or friendly minions, so something like a Shadow or Death on your opponent's stuff does still chain your Septic Veil Weaver. And any kind of buff, of course, which I think is the most obvious synergy for this, where you're buffing your own units, of course, that also chains into a new spell. So you have this theoretical engine here to generate all kinds of resources, much like Lyra the Sunshard was in the past. And upside, it's a smaller minion. It's lower cost, so it's an easier to start engine than Lyra, where you had to commit a much higher amount of mana early in a turn to get Lyra to actually work. But despite that, I think a couple problems for Septic Veil Weaver exist. First off, Radiant Elemental is not in Hearthstone anymore, which is one of the things that made Lyra possible, is dropping that Radiant alongside it, getting those discounts, creating ridiculous chains. That's not going to happen. And I do think the fact that you have to cast this on a minion really does limit the ability to kind of go off like crazy. You're going to end up breaking the chain with Septic Veil Weaver fairly regularly. Plus, Priest just has some kind of stinker spells these days. They got even weaker spells, I think, with the Priest update in a lot of cases. So I don't think the upside or high roll potential is there like it used to be as much with Lyra, because there's no Divine Spirit, Inner Fire outs to just instantly win you a game. So all in all, yes, this is a familiar design of a card that was once very powerful, but because of some limitations, both contextually with other cards that exist and within the effect itself, I don't think the Septic Veil Weaver is going to make as much sense. So at the end of the day, this just kind of feels like you're trading a 2-mana 2/3 for maybe a couple random priest spells, and I don't really think that's that good. That's not that valuable for that slot in your deck for that card draw. You might just want to run something a little bit more directed, more targeted. So in other words, most deck lists are just yeah, a Septic Veil Weaver would feel fine, but I don't really need it. It doesn't really help me. So it ends up never making the cut in a deck list because it's not going to be the kind of fuel or engine that you really, really need to get going. So all in all, I like this card. I think it's totally fine, but I do not think it's a card that's going to see very much play. Ysiel Windsinger is a 4-star card. Labrum of Hope is a 4-star card. Door Attendant is a 4-star card. Door Truthseeker is a 4-star card. Labrum of Wisdom is a 4-star card. Labrum of Justice is a 3-star card. Hand of a Doll is a 4-star card. Grand Slam is a 4-star card. Germination is a 3-star card. Shattered Rumbler is a 3-star card. Natal Lion is a 4-star card. Septic Veilweaver is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. Another card review down. I want to hear your thoughts on these cards. What's going to break the game with Miss Windsinger? How good is Natal Lion? Is the Priest Septic Veilweaver card actually awesome and I'm just missing it and it's going to be amazing? Share those takes in the comments below. But until then, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.